Hey guys, so I am going to walk you through some annotations today, so if you'll follow along on your sheet. So one of the things that we're going to start doing these next couple of days is talking about rhetorical analysis. And rhetorical analysis is, my definition is how people use language to manipulate their audience. And now manipulation is not always bad. Manipulation is the idea of trying to get somebody to convince. So much like y'all do persuasion, this is that form. So how do people use language? So one of the things that we look at is we want to look at the rhetorical situation. So you're talking about three parts. The audience, and we say to the third power, and how they relate to the speaker, and how the speaker relates to the audience. The speaker's purpose, which it may take us a little bit of time to read and figure that out. You don't always know that from the beginning. And then how the audience and the purpose relate to each other. So those are all the three things that we're going to look at. So what you have in front of you is Patrick Henry. So this is Patrick Henry is your speaker. So Patrick Henry is speaking to the members of the Virginia Convention in 1775. So what's going on during this time in history? So we have to think about context. So what's going on during this time in history, right? So we are under British rule. We want to separate. We're not happy with how the king has been treating us. And so we are kind of at a point where we're split as a country or as a colonies, trying to figure out whether we should just stay under the king's rule or to rise up and fight. And so that's what Patrick Henry's speech is kind of about, is the reasons why we should fight. So that will help us for our purpose. So let's look at the audience. So who is in his audience? And we want to say more than just people. So remember we said audience to the third power. So who's in his audience? Well, you have obviously the members of the convention. So you have members. You have those that want to fight the British. Those that don't want to fight, and they don't want to fight for whatever reason. They're too scared, we're not strong enough, whatever it might be. So there's our audience. Okay, so we've got our speaker, we've got our audience, and now we're just waiting for purpose. So we'll come back to that at the end. So remember, what I need you to do is we're going to number our paragraphs. I'm not going to work all the way through this with you. I'll do a couple with you. So let's work Mr. President, no man is number 1. Mr. President, it is natural is 2. I have is 3. I ask is 4. There's the bell. They tell us is 5, it is vain, is 6. Okay, so that's all. Mine are on bigger pages than y'all's, so y'all's are side by side. All right, so that's what we do first when we read a passage, is we look at numbering the paragraphs so that we can reference it a little bit easier. All right, so I'm going to read a couple of these to you, and I'm going to kind of draw my annotations or mark my annotations up to the side. So do these with me so that you can do them on your own. Mr. President, no man thinks more highly than I do of the patriotism as well as abilities of the very worthy gentlemen who have just addressed the House. But different men often see the same subject in different lights, and therefore I hope that it will not be thought disrespectful to those gentlemen if, entertaining as I do opinions of a character very opposite of theirs, I shall speak forth my sentiments freely and without reserve. All right, so let's look at what's happening first. So first we have, what is he doing here? So the idea that no man thinks more highly than I do of patriotism, right? As well as abilities of the very worthy gentlemen who have just addressed the House. So these guys just addressed the House saying that we should not fight the British. All right, so what is he doing by addressing them first? So he's showing respect, right? So before you get into any kind of persuasion or argument, and we don't mean argument as in the negative term, but argument as in a discussion, right? In order for the other side to hear you, you want to make sure and listen to you, you want to make sure that you show them some respect. So if you show them respect, then hopefully they will listen to what you have to say. So that's what he's opening with right there, right? And so I think I've told y'all this before, I always put hearts around conjunctions that are in the passage, and I do it just because I keep track a little bit better. So I think what this does, what conjunctions do, is it shows some kind of switch. And so look at what's in here. But different men often see the same subject in different lights, right? So he's like, uh-oh, I'm going to say something that is against what most people said. So his idea is against the previous speaker. And then the other thing that I notice a lot during this and looking at analysis is semicolons, because on one side of the semicolon is a complete thought, and then on the other side of the semicolon is a complete thought. So there's a reason why the speaker or the writer uses a semicolon instead of a period. And notice we have another conjunction. And therefore I hope, notice that's kind of the tone of I hope is kind of a subordinate role, meaning that he is not showing that or saying that he is more powerful or smarter than those that came before him, right? I hope that I will not be disrespectful to those gentlemen if entertaining as I do opinions of a very opposite character, or character very opposite of theirs. So meaning that his opinion, again, is different than those before. I shall speak forth my sentiments freely and without reserve. Right, so meaning that he's going to lay it without being too cliche. He's going to lay it out on the table. This is no time for ceremony. So if we look at the idea of what a ceremony is, this is like a celebration, right? The question before the House is one of awful moment to this country. So notice we have our footnote. We go down to our footnote. Great importance. So this is basically telling us why he is speaking now. So now we have to say why this time. For my own part, I consider it as nothing less than a question of freedom or slavery. So notice nothing less than. So this is like an understatement, meaning that it is bigger than this, right? It's huge. So notice that this is why, this is the answer to this. This is why it's so important right now, because of freedom or slavery. So these are our options we have right now, freedom or slavery. So notice the contrast, because he'll constantly do this contrast of positive and negative. And then again, notice the semicolon. And in proportion to the magnitude of the subject ought to be the freedom of the debate. So going back to this idea that because we are the value of this, how important this is, we should debate this. And again, that goes back to the idea, if we don't debate it, then we're going back to slavery. It is only in this way that we can hope. Again, notice this idea of hope, right? I'm going to kind of tie ideas together to arrive at truth and fulfill the great responsibility which we hold to God and our country. So notice, first comes God, who we are, right? Who we are responsible to. And then country is second. So notice we have to do what God thinks we should first. Should I keep my opinions at such time through fear of giving offense? So if I keep it to myself, because I'm scared to upset someone, I should consider myself as guilty of treason towards my country. So look up what the word treason means. So it's the idea of going against your country, right? So he's like, if I don't speak up, then I am treasonous, and an act of disloyalty towards the majesty of heaven. So notice this kind of play on majesty, right? So this is kind of a play on the idea of the king versus God, right? And it's not the majesty of Great Britain, but it is the majesty of heaven, which I revere above all earthly kings. So notice this is a slam against the British. So notice what I'm doing as my annotations is I am not just saying what something means, but I'm making connections and looking at the language and why is he saying this. So now we're seeing this trend of a king and a king. So this is like kind of contrasting what we know. All right, I'll do one more paragraph with you. Mr. President, it is natural to man to indulge in the illusions of hope. So notice this is an illusion, not an illusion, right? So this is this idea that this belief in things that aren't there. So notice that this is a concession. And when we talk about argument, you have a concession. And a concession means, I'm going to define this down at the bottom. So a concession is when you address like a reason or a point that the other side believes is true. So he's conceding. All right, men, it is natural for us to indulge, and look at the value of this word. I want you to define that word too for me. To indulge in the illusions of hope. Like, it's natural for us to want to see the good, right? To see the good that could be there, but it's natural for us to do this. We are apt to shut our eyes against a painful truth and listen to the song of the siren till she transforms us into beasts. All right, so now this is an allusion, which is a reference to something historical, or in this case mythological. So notice this gives you a little insight into the illusion. So in Greek mythology, the sirens are sea maidens whose seductive singing lures men to wreck their boats on coastal rocks. In the Odyssey, an epic by Greek poet Homer, Circe, an enchantress, transforms Odysseus's men into swine after they arrive at her island home. Henry's illusion combines these two stories. All right, so again, we have to look at, like, who is the siren? That would be the British, right? And she transforms us into beasts. So they're going to transform us into slaves. Remember, we're going back to this idea of that we have up here of freedom or slavery. So he's going to continue that statement. He's going to continue that statement. So whenever you see an illusion, and this is comparing to, we want to look at the pieces and the parts. So what is happening? Like, who is she or who is he referencing here? So he's referencing the siren as the British, right? Leading us into something that we don't want to go into. Is this the part of wise men engaged in a great and arduous struggle for liberty. So who are the wise men? That is, those are our leaders. Those are the people at the convention. I need you to define arduous for me real quick. So notice when we have a rhetorical question, most of the time we say that a rhetorical question is for the purpose of making the reader think, and that really doesn't say anything. So when we say we have a rhetorical question, it has to be at a point where the audience already kind of knows the answer. So do wise men sit back and wait and struggle for liberty? No, they fight, right? That's the response. Are we disposed to be of the numbers of those who, having eyes, see not, and what are we not seeing? During this time period, what is he saying that we're not seeing? And ears hear not. So again, so if y'all can answer that below. So what are we not seeing and what are we not hearing? And having ears hear not the things which so nearly concern their temporal salvation. So I want y'all to define that for me too. For my part, again, notice he's kind of separating himself, and he did that on the previous page where he says for my own part, right? So I know y'all's is side by side, so draw a line between this and this, right? So he's kind of separating himself. Again, he did that in the beginning where he said my opinion is going to be different than everybody else's. He's doing it again. For my part, whatever anguish of spirit it may cost, I am willing to know the whole truth, to know the worst and to provide for it. So what is the truth? What is the truth of their situation? And if the truth is the worst, then he's going to provide for it. So that means that there's going to be some kind of action. All right, so y'all have seen what I have annotated in these 2 pages, or in these first 2 paragraphs. So my expectation of you by tomorrow for the rest of the period is to read and annotate this today. Tomorrow when you walk in, this needs to be done because I'm going to walk you through an analysis of something else later. All right, that's it for today.